Hey everybody, it is Monday, April 14th. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. And we're here to remind you that you have about 36 hours and counting to get your taxes in. Tomorrow is tax day. It falls on a weekday this year, which means it's the actual deadline tomorrow. But I know all of you Mo News listeners, you definitely got in your returns early, right?
We see everyone nodding
Yes.
through the screens here.
Especially since we know it's been a bit chaotic over there at the IRS. So there might be some delays this year when it comes to your returns, though we'll see. Jill, a very exciting final at the Masters yesterday. For those of you who were watching golf yesterday, Rory McIlroy makes history. The first golfer in more than 2 decades to win what they call the Golf Grand Slam. He finally checks off the Masters here. So he's just one of a handful of golfers in modern golf history to win the 4 big tournaments. It went down to a playoff there between him and Justin Rose.
Moshe, he was so emotional at winning the Grand Slam, especially as you said, it went into that sudden death playoff. He could have won the whole thing without it, but he perhaps was looking like he was about to choke. But then he came back for that final round. And he took the whole thing, and I'm happy for him. It was very emotional. All right, that is the big sports headline for the weekend. And now to the rest of the headlines. A number of major court rulings regarding President Trump's deportation efforts. The Supreme Court says the Trump administration needs to return the man wrongly deported to El Salvador and also give daily updates on their efforts. The White House response. Meanwhile, a lower court rules that an anti-Israel activist who went to Columbia University and has a green card can, in fact, be deported. In international news, Iranian and U.S. officials engaged in their first nuclear talks in years, what both sides are saying about the meeting. And back in the U.S., a fire at the Pennsylvania governor's residence on the first night of Passover is ruled as arson. We'll tell you about the suspect in custody. And the tariff back and forth continues. The Commerce Secretary now says the tariff exemptions for electronics and smartphones that were announced on Friday are only temporary. Plus RFK Jr. promising that he could find a cause for autism by September. What autism organizations are saying. And the deadline to get your real ID is fast approaching, what you need to know so you don't get stopped at the airport. And finally, Gayle King and Katy Perry are among a all-women crew launching to space today. And Moshe is on this day in history.
We'll tell you about the presidential assassination, Jill, that actually began as a kidnapping attempt. They wanted to kidnap the president. They ended up assassinating him. I'll tell you the backstory.
Okay, let's start with some developments when it comes to President Trump's showdown with the courts over his deportation efforts. A lot of fronts we've been following here at Mo News. So first, the latest on the deportation of a migrant who was living in Maryland and was accidentally sent to El Salvador last month during that mass deportation of more than 200 alleged gang members. The government has acknowledged that they were not legally supposed to send Kilmar Abrego Garcia back to El Salvador, but they did anyway. They say they have no way to correct what they call a clerical error and bring him back to the United States. Late Thursday, the Supreme Court upheld a lower court ruling that the White House must, quote, facilitate his return. That means the administration has been ordered to at least provide daily updates on the status of Abrego Garcia. On Saturday, the administration confirmed that Garcia is alive and he remains in that mega prison in El Salvador, but they gave no information on what U.S. officials have done or are doing to try to get him back. On Saturday, Trump posted on Truth Social that the migrants deported are barbarians and said they are in the sole custody of El Salvador's president. So their future is up to that country's leader.
Yeah, so what we're reading into that, and we'll certainly learn more today as Bukele, the leader of El Salvador, is at the White House, incidentally, is that the Trump administration doesn't intend to bring Garcia back. They've said as much. They are reading into the word facilitate, and I'll get more into that here in a second. But that big meeting at the White House today, we're likely to learn more on this case.
As a refresher, Abrego Garcia initially entered the U.S. illegally in 2011, but a judge in 2019 granted him protection from being deported, at least to his home country of El Salvador. The judge said he could be deported to a third country, but cited concerns for his safety if he were to return to El Salvador. But then in mid-March, Garcia was part of this group of more than 200 alleged foreign gang members sent in planes to El Salvador under the 1798 Alien Enemies Act, which President Trump invoked in order to deport these men without due process. A lower court ruled there is little evidence to support his connection to a gang and that he must be returned home to his family. But instead, the administration filed an emergency appeal to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court came back saying that they needed the lower court judge to be more clear and specific in its decision. The lower court judge clarified Friday that she is instead now directing the government to facilitate his release, which is a firmer, clearer stance than her previous one.
So if you're confused, we certainly have been. Here's your quick recap. Abrego Garcia comes in the country illegally. Ruled in 2019 that he actually faces threats in his home country. And so he doesn't get asylum here, but he does get some legal status. And the government is told you cannot deport him back to El Salvador. Fast forward 6 years later to 2025, just last month, and the government rounds him up. And apparently, according to, as they say, have a clerical or administrative error, they sent him back to El Salvador. And they've admitted as much in court, saying, yeah, they screwed up, but they have no intention of bringing him back, nor do they feel they need to bring him back. So Abrego Garcia's family and lawyers have filed cases. It went to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court here, and this is where we get into the technicalities, says the government must facilitate his release. Now, the government, the White House, is saying facilitate doesn't mean bring him back. It just means facilitate. It depends on what your definition of a facilitate is. The judge said facilitate and effectuate. The Supreme Court didn't like the word effectuate, sent it back down to her. She said, how about we use the word direct? I would like the government to facilitate and direct his release back to America. The judge, the lower court judge, after the Supreme Court rule last week, said, I want him back on Friday. I want him back on Saturday. I want him back. And the government's like, no, we need more time on this. So they did say on Saturday he is alive and in that prison, and that's all they would say. She has a hearing now on Tuesday, tomorrow, so we'll learn more there. But what you have Trump saying, what you have the White House saying here is, we are following the Supreme Court here. We are facilitating his release. But he now is in El Salvador. He is a citizen of El Salvador. So it is up to the president of El Salvador, Nayib Bukele, to decide what to do here. Now, we should note background here. The U.S. is paying El Salvador $20,000 per person that we send to prison there. And he's been very amenable, saying, I will take anything you guys want to send me here in El Salvador. I am known for my mega prisons. And even if you want to send American citizens here, which, by the way, is unconstitutional, I will happily take them into my prisons at a price of $20,000 per person. So we will have the meeting today between Donald Trump and the El Salvadoran president. He landed over the weekend. Critics of the White House are saying, come on. You guys can totally get El Salvador to send this guy back. The White House is saying, I don't know. It is up to him on whether he wants to send him back. So we will continue to watch this case here as, continue to see this tug of war here between the executive and the judiciary, and the executive saying, there are lines you can't cross here when it comes to executive authority. And so in all likelihood, Jill, this has already risen to the Supreme Court once, and now this could go to the Supreme Court again as this back and forth continues. We, again, will watch the meeting today and the next court hearing tomorrow.
And then another immigration case that's been making news this past few weeks. On Friday afternoon, a judge ruled that Columbia University graduate and one of the leaders of last year's anti-Israel protests, Mahmoud Khalil, can be deported. Khalil was in the U.S. legally, initially on a visa and then on a green card. He is also married to an American citizen. The State Department revoked his green card because he led a group that is supportive of Hamas and has made statements calling for bringing down Western civilization. It is part of a broader move against hundreds of foreign students in the United States who have been critical of the U.S. government's foreign policy or said things supportive of U.S. adversaries. Critics argue that these deportations violate the First Amendment and due process rights, which the U.S. extends to everyone on American soil. But Secretary of State Marco Rubio relied on the Immigration Nationality Act of 1952 to order Khalil's arrest. The act gives the Secretary of State authority to decide that a non-citizen's presence in the United States threatens the country's foreign policy goals. Khalil's lawyer has vowed to appeal the ruling. His deportation is on hold for now until that happens. His legal team has until April 23rd to request a stay, or the judge warned that she will order his deportation to Syria, where he was born, or to Algeria, where he is a citizen.
We should note that Immigration Nationality Act of 1952, rarely used, but this is something that the administration has looked into and is now relying on for Marco Rubio to continue to revoke visas for people that he says are here and are negatively impacting the U.S. foreign policy or are not abiding by the agreement people make when they get a visa to come to America or even a green card. Over the weekend, there were a number of protests across New York City for Khalil. Many say that, he was just speaking out on behalf of Palestinian rights, and this could happen to anybody. His case, though, we should note, is different from some of the other cases we've been following of foreign students. In other cases, some students just wrote like an op-ed piece for their campus newspaper, critical of Israel or critical of American foreign policy. In the case of Khalil, at Columbia University, his group was involved in disseminating materials that can originally be tied to Hamas or are pro-Hamas. His group was also involved in the takeover of campus buildings. His group praised Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas. So ultimately here, not all these cases are the same, but as far as the State Department is concerned, none of these people should be in the country. So we'll continue to monitor all of this. This obviously has concerned some folks in the university world, in the education world, about how this is being executed and whether there's enough nuance here in these types of cases. But notable here that this judge said, yep, they've met the merits. They can deport this guy even with a green card.
Staying with immigration, the Washington Post reported over the weekend that the Trump administration's goal is to deport 1 million migrants in 1 year. That number would surpass previous records. The highest was 400,000 deportations under President Obama. Some immigration experts say 1 million is unrealistic, if not impossible, given the current funding and staffing levels. They also cite the fact that most migrants have a right to fight their case in immigration court before being sent out of the country. But apparently, White House advisor Stephen Miller has been strategizing with officials on almost a daily basis to make it happen. The administration is reportedly negotiating with nearly 30 countries to take migrants who are not citizens due to the fact that there are more than 1.4 million immigrants who have final deportation orders, but whose countries of origin will not take them back.
So lots of immigration headlines in the news. It was, of course, Trump's number one issue on the campaign trail. If it's hard to keep up, well, don't worry, we're here for you. In addition to these daily updates, if you're a Mo News Premium member, we're doing a special workshop for all of you on Wednesday evening. You can join us live at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. It'll be a Zoom with an expert on all things immigration. He's Austin Coker. He's a professor over at Syracuse University. I've talked to him a couple times. Has a very comprehensive historical perspective and legal perspective when it comes to all things immigration. If you can join us live at 8 p.m. Eastern, you can get your questions answered. We'll also make it available to all of you as a Mo News Premium podcast as well. If you're not a premium member, well, now is a good time to sign up. We have officially launched our annual sale early this year. We're calling it the Good News Sale. The code, Good News. You get 20% off your premium membership through the end of the month. That includes new members, monthly members who want to upgrade to annual, group members who want to upgrade to annual, existing members who want to get a discount on their renewal. Pretty much everybody, Joel. Use the code Good News over at mo.news/premium. Or I think we still have the URL mo.news/no-brainer because, it's a no-brainer to join premium. And among the special benefits, the premium Instagram account where we did 120 posts over the weekend, the premium podcast, and these special workshops. Jill, I'll see you there.
You know it.
Jill's first in line to get her questions answered, everybody. And then the rest of you come.
The pressure. Oh my God. Now I need to really come up with a good question.
Jill doesn't have any questions. She gives you the news. So she's there to answer your questions.
Actually, I think there's always more to learn.
Hey, listen, we have questions on a daily basis here. And so Professor Coker will be one of the people we're getting answers from.
Time for the speed read from Fox News. The first official U.S. talks with Iran over its nuclear program began Saturday, marking the highest level of discussion between the two countries in years. Iran's foreign minister called the talks constructive and promising. The White House used similar terms as well. Both sides had gone into this meeting, which took place in the country of Oman, with a primary objective of determining whether the other party was serious about a new nuclear deal or just stringing them along. So they both came out of the conversation convinced that both sides are quite serious. This is according to the Iranian foreign minister. So Iran agreed to these talks, which they had rejected before, likely because of military pressure. The U.S. moved powerful military assets into the region. Trump has threatened Iran to reach a deal or face the prospect of military annihilation. The meeting reportedly consisted of Iranian leaders floating the idea of limiting their nuclear arsenal in exchange for sanction relief. Tensions between the two countries has been high since Trump pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal that was negotiated under President Obama, which put strict limits on Iran's uranium production. Since then, they've revamped that and are believed to be just weeks away from being able to build a nuclear weapon, although U.S. intelligence does not believe that they are pursuing one at the moment.
So they have a civilian nuclear program in Iran, and the big difference between a civilian nuclear program like nuclear power plants and having nuclear weapons is just the level of enrichment of uranium that you're engaged in. So there have been a lot of various intel reports from the Israelis, from Europe, from the Americans that, Iran is weeks away, is months away, that they're like at the precipice of it. And that's been a major concern here for the Israelis and Americans in particular, because the Iranians refer to Big Satan as America and Israel as Little Satan. And the Israelis, of course, are in the region, and that's where they could immediately be struck by the Iranians, as we've seen in the recent months here. And so ultimately for them, it is an acute concern. And they have actually been hoping the Americans were over talking to Iran here. Remember, back during Trump's first term, he pulled out of the nuclear deal that Obama had signed with them. Obama had signed a deal that he says allowed supervisors in there to ensure Iran didn't get nukes, but still allowed Iran to bring in a whole bunch of money, also continue to arm their various terror groups around the region, like Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, the ones we've been telling you about. Trump came in 2017 and said, no, this is a terrible deal for us, and pulled out of that deal. So for the past 8 years or so, including during the Biden administration, there's been no deal with Iran. And so they've been dealing with it through intelligence, through military action, through covert and overt military action, both mainly the Israelis here. It's one of the reasons why Netanyahu actually was in Washington last week. His hope that he's decimated Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Iranians so much that he has them on the ropes here, and that America was on board with like a military strike right now while Iran is weak to take out what is their program right now. Now, when he arrived at the White House on Monday, again, this is the reported details, Trump apparently ready to talk right now with Iran, not ready for military action. So he sent his special envoy, Steve Witkoff. Witkoff, we've told you about before. He is Trump's real estate buddy. No diplomatic experience, but Trump loves him and loves his style. So Witkoff has been put in charge of the Israel-Hamas talks, the Russia-Ukraine talks, and now the Iran talks. In fact, Witkoff went from meeting Putin on Friday to flying to Oman for these Iran meetings. So the meetings went well enough where they have now scheduled further meetings next weekend. The big question is, what deal can come up here? Is this just a delay tactic by the Iranians? The deal that the Israelis want, that some folks in the administration want, would be a complete takedown of any nuclear program by Iran, similar to the deal that the Bush administration struck with Libya more than 20 years ago. Back in 2003, after the U.S. invaded Iraq and took out Saddam, Gaddafi, the dictator of Libya, was like, oh, that's not good, and actually negotiated a deal with America to give up his nuclear weapons program. They're hoping for that sort of deal. It does not appear the Iranians are ready for that, because remember, if you have a nuclear program and you're a dictator, it's sort of an insurance policy. Think Kim Jong-un. He ain't going anywhere because he has nukes. And the lesson so far, and this is a conversation that came up with senior Israeli officials when I was in Washington last week, is Libya gave up its nukes. What happened to Gaddafi? 8 years later, he was gone. Ukraine gave up its nukes in the 90s. The UK, the US, Russia made its promises. Well, we know how Ukraine's ended up. So the lesson the Iranians and others might take away is maybe we should get nuclear weapons. So that's the background here for these negotiations, and we'll see how they go.
From the Philadelphia Inquirer, early Sunday morning, a suspect lit the Pennsylvania governor's residence on fire in Harrisburg. State police have labeled the incident as arson. Governor Josh Shapiro and his family were inside at the time, having just finished celebrating the first night of Passover. The family was safely evacuated by state police. There were no injuries reported. The fire caused significant damage to a portion of the residence. Pennsylvania state authorities announced later that they arrested a 38-year-old man from Harrisburg on Sunday afternoon. The suspect has been identified as Cody Balmer. He jumped a fence and managed to evade state troopers as he broke into the building and set it on fire.
So what we know so far as of late Sunday night, he used homemade incendiary devices. He fled the scene, was arrested in Harrisburg on Sunday afternoon. He is in custody and expected to be charged with attempted murder, arson and terrorism. They're still trying to figure out his motive, whether it was political or whether it was anti-Semitism, given that the fire broke out, again, just hours after the governor posted a photo of his Seder table. Is very prominent with his Jewish faith. It would be quite a coincidence if the attack just happened to be on the first night of Passover. So they will continue to dig in there. Shapiro did give a particularly emotional address on Sunday afternoon before reporters. He went through various scenarios, including anti-Semitism. Here is Shapiro talking about the attack and what he called several truths about the attack.
But we do know that this attack was targeted. We don't know the person's specific motive yet, but we do know a few truths. First, this type of violence is not okay. This kind of violence is becoming far too common in our society. And I don't give a damn if it's coming from one particular side or the other, directed at one particular party or another, or one particular person or another. It is not okay. If he was trying to terrorize our family, our friends, the Jewish community who joined us for a Passover Seder in that room last night, hear me on this. We celebrated our faith last night proudly, and in a few hours we will celebrate our second Seder of Passover again.
Moshe, I'm not sure if it comes across just from listening to the sound, but he's clearly shaken up a bit.
Yeah, if you look at the pictures inside the home, it did a lot of damage. And you can only imagine, you take certain things for granted when you're the governor of a state, that you have security stationed outside your home all the time. And the fact that you'd be woken up at 2 a.m. and your house is on fire because someone lit it on fire is something, and I imagine that every prominent official, when they saw the killing of the insurance CEO by Mangione or the assassination attempt on Trump, things have escalated in this country. We've seen recently also the violence against Tesla vehicles and Tesla dealerships across the country. So we're seeing right on left, left on right, and also attacks on people for their faith or their background. And so I think he is trying to say here, enough is enough. Story will keep tracking as we learn more about this suspect.
From Politico, more tariff whiplash this weekend. The White House announced late Friday some key exemptions for their China tariffs. Electronics like smartphones, computers, and semiconductors will be exempt from some of the most aggressive tariffs, namely the 145% tariff on China, where a lot of the world's electronics are manufactured. The announcement was part of a long list of products that will not be included in the president's reciprocal tariffs posted by the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol Friday evening. But less than 48 hours later, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said the exemption is only temporary. He said electronics will be tariffed again in the next few weeks, subject to a new semiconductor tariff. On ABC News on Sunday, Lutnick said the tariff is to encourage the semiconductor industry as well as the pharmaceutical industry to move its business to the United States. Let's hear some of that.
We need to have semiconductors, we need to have chips, and we need to have flat panels. We need to have these things made in America. We can't be reliant on Southeast Asia for all of the things that operate for us. So what he's doing is he's saying they're exempt from the reciprocal tariffs, but they're included in the semiconductor tariffs, which are coming in probably a month or two.
All right, so that was Lutnick with the latest sort of back and forth on Friday night. We saw the big headline. It's a huge win for Apple, for Dell, a number of major tech companies who were very concerned about these tariffs. We're talking about that the price of iPhones were going to rise by $700. And while a number of these manufacturers have been trying to move their factories gradually out of China, especially since COVID, it takes billions of dollars, lots of years to move things out, especially since they have spent decades working their way into China, working on their supply chain using China. And so here they have what appears to be now temporary relief when it comes to those tariffs. Again, Lutnick saying it's just a matter of a month or two before the tariffs come back in a specific form. But this is the back and forth that people on Wall Street and in business are so concerned about, because it is very difficult to plan a business around constant changes like this. Now, you do have Peter Navarro, one of the top economic advisors of the White House, saying this is all part of the plan. Others will say, how could this be part of the plan? You guys are changing things every single day. So there's a lot of back and forth there, but Lutnick in particular has made moving iPhones and iPhone production to the U.S. a priority. So it was a surprise to hear that tariff exception on Friday night. And then, of course, not, I guess, less surprising to hear that the tariffs are going to come back in some form. A background here on China. We buy about $500 billion in goods from China every year, one of our top trading partners. Just context, though, we are a $36 trillion economy. So some believe that we're overplaying this. At the same time, we do depend on a lot of key things from China. And it includes a lot of sectors, right? There's a lot of people in small businesses and other sectors who are like, wait, why does Apple, a $1 trillion company, get an exception here when we are a much smaller company and we have much smaller margins and our stuff from China still has that 145% tariff or so. So there are a lot of questions here about which sectors are going to be involved in, for how long, who's getting exceptions, how one gets an exception. Nonetheless, there's a lot of Americans who are watching these headlines, makes them more concerned about the economy. We got the latest indication of that from a CBS News YouGov poll over the weekend. 2/3 of Americans think tariffs will make the economy worse in the short term. That is one of the big concerns here that companies have, that even if you're not directly impacted by China, it is going to lead you to spend less in what is a consumer-driven economy, so it could impact a lot of businesses.
From the Mo News Instagram account, Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. said late last week that the government will determine the cause of autism by this September. He announced the sweeping new government effort Thursday at the cabinet meeting at the White House. He said he expects to have a finding by September. That's just 5 months from now. Kennedy said hundreds of scientists will join a massive push for more testing and research. The National Institutes of Health already spends more than $300 million a year on autism research, and Kennedy hasn't explained how this new effort will be different. Autism is a developmental condition primarily linked to genetic differences with some environmental risk factors like air pollution and pesticides, as well as maternal age and health under study. Rates of autism diagnoses have increased in recent decades. The CDC said about 1 in 36 children were identified with autism spectrum disorder in 2020. Kennedy suggested Thursday that the new numbers may show that they're going up again to about 1 in 31. In 2000, the rate was 1 in 150. Researchers who study autism say they don't know all of the reasons why the numbers have increased, but there are a few known reasons, including increased awareness, broader definitions of what constitutes autism, and improved screening tools and processes.
Yeah, so part of what the experts say has led to us going from a rate of 1 in 150 to 1 in 31 is just more recognition of who falls in the autism spectrum. Nonetheless, I've talked to people in the autism community, Jill, after we posted this video late last week, and they say, they are all for more research related to autism here. They were just taken aback by the announcement by Kennedy that suddenly we're going to have the reason or reasons by September, just 5 months away, that none of them have been contacted about this. And there have ultimately not been much in the way of details about how this process is going to go on. Also adding concerns is that Kennedy has been one of the people who prominently has been focused on drawing a line between vaccines and autism. There was one study that was eventually debunked from 1998 about a link there. So essentially, by dictating that he'll know the reason within 5 months, they say he probably already knows what he wants the reason to be, and he's going to back into it. So that's one of their concerns there. So we're waiting for some more details here from RFK and the Health and Human Services Department, as well as National Institutes of Health, who you mentioned spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year on autism research. And so we'll see what comes of it. But people in the autism community in particular who I've spoken to are a little concerned right now until they learn more.
Now to a quick heads up from Yahoo News. If you plan to fly domestically in the next couple of months, make sure your license is updated. You have less than a month until May 7th to update your license to be Real ID compliant, or else you won't be able to fly domestically or access certain federal facilities. In most states, if your license has a little star in the upper right-hand corner, it is a Real ID.
Every state's different, though. In California, apparently it's a yellow bear in the corner, so definitely Google it to make sure you have one.
If not, then you'll need to visit your local DMV if you want to fly. And since the rules differ state by state, make sure to check what documents you'll need to bring. Things like your proof of identity, residency, legal status, and social security number. In most states, the Real ID costs the same as a regular license, but in Pennsylvania and Virginia, there are additional fees.
So the Real ID actually, remarkably, comes out of 9/11. new federal rules about upping the security on driver's licenses. So the Congress passed the Real ID Act 20 years ago. It was supposed to go into effect back in 2008. It just kept getting postponed again and again and again and again. Well, this time they say it's real, folks. We just got a couple weeks away. If you're not able to get a DMV appointment, I know that they're extending the hours in California. It's basically impossible in some states to get a DMV appointment right now. You can use, if you have a passport card, a passport, or a military ID, those will all work since they're federal IDs. Right now, as of this month, the TSA reports that 81% of travelers are carrying a real ID compliant identification, though that does leave 1 out of 5 Americans without real ID right now. So definitely make sure you're one of them if you plan to fly sometime soon. There is an easy-to-use website over at the Department of Homeland Security to get you to your state's information on how to get one as quickly as possible. But again, if you can't, passports are another way to go.
And finally, from CBS News, a historic all-female flight takes place this morning, taking a group of 6 on a brief trip to the edge of space, 62 miles off the ground. The all-women crew includes pop star Katy Perry, journalists Gayle King and Lauren Sanchez. We should mention Sanchez also happens to be the fiance of Blue Origin owner Jeff Bezos. Also on board, former NASA rocket scientist Aisha Bowe, civil rights activist Amanda Nguyen, and film producer Carrie Ann Flynn. Blue Origin says this will be the first all-female flight since 1963, when a Soviet Union astronaut, Valentina Tereshkova, flew into space solo. So not quite the same thing.
The only other exclusive flight to space, Jill, that only had people with XX chromosomes aboard.
Bezos started Blue Origin in 2000. He's been offering these joyrides to celebrities and other paying customers since 2021. Today's launch will be the company's 11th human flight and just 31st overall. It is taking off from a private ranch in rural Texas, about 140 miles east of El Paso. Last week, Gayle King said her goodbye on the morning show and admitted she was a little nervous.
I'm looking forward to just floating in space and just seeing what that feels like and what that looks like. That's the thing I'm most looking forward to, that and looking out the window. Mm-hmm. But I found myself wondering, how do you get back into your seat? After you get out of the seat and you're floating around, how do you get back down to your seat? Is it like swimming back down? I'll learn that in training and try to float with some dignity.
Gayle says she plans to bring a small bag with her into space, including a locket with a photo of her son and daughter, a stuffed version of her grandson's favorite Sesame Street character, a bracelet made by a coworker's daughter as well. We've watched a few of these flights. They get to bring a few things into space with them, so they can say this thing's officially been in space. The flight is set to take place Monday morning, just after 9 a.m. The whole thing is 11 minutes. They basically go up to about 62 miles, which is the boundary between Earth and space. It is flight autonomously. There's no pilot. So you basically go up and then you go down. You spend a few moments there in zero gravity up in space. Again, you mentioned this is not the first flight. You've had William Shatner has flown on one of these. Michael Strahan has flown on one of these. And the first one, Jeff Bezos flew on. So now he's sending his fiance up there on flight 11.
So I guess he feels pretty confident that it's safe.
I would imagine so, Jill. All right, now time for On This Day in History. We begin in 1865 with the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. On this day, he is shot in the head by John Wilkes Booth in Ford's Theater as he's watching a play. John Wilkes Booth shouted, "Sic semper tyrannis," in Latin, meaning ever thus to tyrants, the South is avenged, as he jumped onto stage from the balcony, fleeing on horseback. Something you may not know is that he actually planned to kidnap Lincoln just a month before. He wanted to capture him, take him to Richmond, the Confederate capital. It just so happens that on March 20th, the day of the kidnapping plan, the president didn't appear on the spot that Booth thought he was going to be at. So he decided to change plans, switch gears, and go to just an assassination attempt. But not just the assassination of Lincoln. He plotted the assassination of Lincoln, the vice president, Andrew Johnson, as well as the Secretary of State, William Seward. His plan was to throw complete chaos into the U.S. government. Now, one of his buddies did shoot Seward, the Secretary of State. He wounded him, but he did not die. And then the guy that Booth assigned to kill the vice president just lost his nerve and fled, like never bothered to shoot the vice president. Also, Johnson was like a total drunk, the vice president, and like wasn't where he was supposed to be either. So it just so happens that they end up killing Lincoln there. Of course, there would be a search for Booth, and when they finally get to him, they give him a choice between coming out alive or not, and he chose the latter. All right, on this day in 1828, the Webster's American Dictionary of the English Language officially is printed for the first time, April 14th, 1828, thanks to Noah Webster, a lawyer who had an avid interest in language and education. He felt like we deserved an English dictionary, an American English dictionary with Americanisms. A lot of what he did is things that we've seen over time, which take out a lot of the spellings that you know in Great Britain, in the UK, all those extra U's that they have and extra letters. Well, he was like, no, in America, we don't do all those extra U's. You know, words like color, valor, parlor. Over in the UK, they like to add the U to it. You know, over time, we've done our own thing here in the US, Jill.
So my daughter is learning how to read right now. And as I am reading with her and learning all the tricks and the rules, it's not intuitive. I will say that.
No, and by the way, you know, part of it's because like Noah Webster's like, this is the way we're going to spell it in America. I mean, some of these decisions are made over time, and some stuff is picked up over time. So while we probably began 250 years ago with pretty similar language, over time, you know, things evolve. Regional, you know, even as you know, regional dialects and regional words evolve, and then we get to a point where one man's trousers is another man's pants. Speaking of the UK and the US, on this day in history, there was a ship headed from one to the other. It was called the Titanic. On this day in history at 11:40 p.m. at a speed of just about 23 miles per hour or 20 knots, an iceberg straight ahead scrapes the side of the Titanic. About 6 seconds is what they estimate the interaction lasted, slicing a hole open in the hull. It would then take about 2 hours and 40 minutes for the whole ship to sink. And that's your summary of the movie there, Joel, in about 30 seconds.
It took James Cameron, 3 hours and change. So
longer than it actually took the Titanic to sink to tell the story of the Titanic. All right, we end here with a bit of pop culture history. On this day in 1978, the original soundtrack from the motion picture Grease was released 47 years ago. And another famous film, on this day in 1989, 36 years ago today, Say Anything, starring John Cusack, premiered in theaters, Jill. The most famous example of someone holding a boombox above their head in a film, right? We can give that to Cusack.
If not him, I don't know who gets that.
And finally, on this day, most recently, 7 years ago, Beyonce became the first Black woman to headline Coachella, which is happening again this weekend. I've been seeing the photos and videos coming out of Coachella online, including apparently, a lot of musical acts. Apparently, Bernie Sanders was at Coachella this weekend. I have to figure out what he said.
Well, if he was there, then I'm not too old to go.
No, you are not too. Bernie Sanders goes to Coachella. It also means that it's probably not as cool as it once was.
Well, what we know is still cool, Moshe, and always will be. Listening to the Mo News podcast. Thank you guys. If you like what you hear, share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store. And again, a reminder, our annual sale is live right now. Code Good News, 20% off annual memberships to Mo News Premium. It's a way to support what we're doing here. We are majority supported here by all of you who are Mo News Premium members. So we appreciate all of you who have become members, who are going to become members after this podcast. So check it out over at mo.news/premium. Code is Good News.
Thanks for listening to the Mo News podcast. Have a fantastic day. I hope you enjoyed.